Hey, sleepyheads. I know it's been a long day. Maybe your thoughts have been a little too loud, or your heart's been a little too heavy. But don't worry. You're safe now. You're right here, where the monsters don't win, and soft voices still matter. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? What time is it there? And who was the one person today who made you feel even a little more at peace? Tell us in the comments. We read every word and we care. Now, let's talk about someone who always made us feel safe. Someone who never needed to shout, never needed to fight, because her warmth did all the work. Muriel, the softest soul in the middle of nowhere. The only light in a house full of shadows. The quiet strength courage clung to when the world turned terrifying. Tonight we begin exploring her first and most beautiful quality, nurturing. It was a windy afternoon in the middle of nowhere. The clouds above the old farmhouse rolled like slow thoughts, and the air had a hint of rain in it. Courage sat by the window, ears down, eyes wide. He didn't bark, didn't whimper, but Muriel knew. You're feeling it again, aren't you? That storm. Not the one outside, the one inside. She didn't ask Courage to explain. Didn't ask him to be brave. She just walked over, picked him up, and wrapped him in the soft blue quilt that smelled like cinnamon and safety. She rocked him gently in that old wooden chair. It creaked like an old song. There now, dear. It's all right. You've done enough. You've seen enough. Now it's time to rest. That's nurturing. It's not fixing. It's not pushing. It's making room for someone to be small without making them feel weak. That evening, Eustace was his usual grumbly self. He knocked over a cup, blamed Courage, yelled something about dinner being too warm, too cold, too something. Muriel didn't snap back. She didn't shrink either. She calmly set another plate in front of him. Your food's not angry at you, Eustace, she said with a soft smile. But it might feel better if you said thank you. Eustace muttered under his breath, but he ate every bite. Muriel didn't control people. She just made the world feel kinder, so they could soften on their own. That night, Courage had a nightmare. Something about shadows and mirrors. Voices that sounded like his, but meaner. He padded down the creaky stairs, and there she was. Muriel, in her rocking chair, awake, waiting. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Courage shook his head. She didn't ask why. Didn't ask what he'd seen. She just opened her arms, and he climbed in. His breathing slowed. His trembling faded. She sang the softest tune, the one she always hummed when storms rolled in. No lyrics, just love. Muriel didn't protect Courage with walls or weapons. She protected him with presence. She made him feel unconditionally safe in a world that never was. So now, sweet listener, as you lie in your own quiet space, maybe with thoughts that won't settle, or a heart that's a little tender, let Muriel's voice rock you too. There now, love. You've done enough. Come here and rest. I'll stay right here, and nothing scary can reach you tonight. Because nurturing isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's what stays. It's what holds. It's what waits for you to be ready and never rushes. Let's continue now. The wind had settled in nowhere. The house creaked gently like it was breathing in its sleep. And Muriel was in the kitchen, her hands soft with flour, rolling out dough for biscuits. Not because she had to, just because Courage liked the smell. He always calms down when it smells like home, she whispered to herself. Courage sat nearby, paws crossed, eyes watching the oven like it held the sun. Muriel didn't ask for anything in return. She didn't cook for praise. She nurtured simply because it was who she was. And she never missed the little signs Courage gave off, the twitch of his ears, the shift in his breath, the way his eyes darted when something felt off. A good caretaker listens before they speak, she'd once told Eustace. But a great one listens even when no one's talking. Later, a letter arrived, a strange crumpled envelope with no return address, covered in dirt. "Smelling of mothballs." Courage whimpered. He knew what this meant. Trouble, creeps, or worse riddles. Muriel held the envelope gently. "It's all right, dear. Nothing's going to hurt you while I'm here." She didn't throw it away, didn't panic. She made Courage a cup of warm thistle milk, sat him beside her on the sofa, and only then opened the letter. It turned out to be nothing but a weird, spammy coupon. 1 free bucket of haunted bones. Muriel laughed softly. "Silly thing. Well, at least it gave us an excuse to sit down together." Courage exhaled, safe again. That's nurturing, turning false alarms into calm moments, never making you feel silly for being scared. Later, Eustace got himself locked in the shed. Again, grumbling, banging on the wood, calling Courage. Stupid dog, even from behind the door. Muriel took her time. Not out of cruelty, but because she believed in breathing before reacting. She eventually walked out, unlocked the door, and handed him a warm towel. "Maybe next time you'll knock before slamming things shut," she said gently. And as always, she had a biscuit for him too. Because even the grumpy needs softness. And Muriel never picked who deserved comfort. She gave it freely. That evening, after dinner, she played a tune on her harmonica. Low, sweet, full of air and memory. Courage sat beside her, eyes fluttering closed. "You like this one, don't you?" she whispered. He didn't nod, didn't bark. He just rested. And when he finally fell asleep at her feet, Muriel covered him with a quilt, the one she used only when he was sad. She touched his ear softly. "That's it, love. Breathe easy now. You're not alone. Not ever." Next day was a slow, gray day in nowhere. Rain tapped softly on the farmhouse windows. The sky was low, and the wind carried stories no one wanted to remember. Inside, everything was quiet, except for the kettle gently hissing and the steady thump-thump of Muriel's slippers on the old wooden floor. She was making tea, not for herself, not even because it was cold, but because Courage looked restless again. He wasn't shaking, wasn't hiding, but Muriel knew. "Storms don't always show on the outside, dear," she said, placing the teacup beside him. "Sometimes they just rattle around inside you." Courage nestled his head against her lap. No words. Just trust. Muriel placed her hand on his back and began to hum. No big tune. No words. Just a quiet rhythm of safety. That's nurturing. Meeting someone exactly where they are, even if they don't say a single word. Later, a strange fog rolled in from the hills. It curled around the house like fingers, soft but unsettling. Eustace groaned. "Bah, nonsense. Just weather." But Courage whimpered. His fur bristled. He knew something wasn't right. Muriel didn't argue with Eustace. Didn't ignore Courage either. She closed the curtains, lit a small lamp, and whispered, "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. But not in the dark." She brewed soup, laid out extra blankets, put on the old radio station that played slow jazz from nowhere in particular. The fog was still outside. But inside, everything was warm, because Muriel never tried to erase fear. She just made sure it had a soft place to rest. Later that day, a delivery arrived. A big, odd-looking box on no sender. No note. Eustace opened it. Inside, a mirror. But not just any mirror. One that didn't show you your face, but your worst fear. Eustace laughed. Thought it was a joke. Courage peeked in and saw Muriel disappearing. He yelped. Panicked. Muriel rushed over, turned the mirror gently away. She knelt beside him. Oh, love, you could lose everything, but you'll never lose me. Not while I have breath in my body. She unplugged the mirror, draped a blanket over it. Some things aren't meant to be stared at. They're meant to be comforted through. Courage licked her cheek. Muriel smiled. That night, she stitched a small patch onto his blanket, a heart made of soft green fabric. So even if I'm asleep, this can hold you. The farmhouse was quiet today. Not spooky, not stormy, just calm, still. Even Eustace hadn't raised his voice since morning. Courage was curled in the hallway, resting his chin on the floor, watching a moth flutter against the window pane. He wasn't afraid, but he was thinking. And Muriel noticed. You're wondering about something, aren't you? She said as she walked by. Courage looked up, eyes wide and blinking. That's all right, dear. You don't have to explain it. Sometimes just being wondered with is enough. She didn't ask what the thought was. She just sat nearby, close but not too close, and began peeling apples for a pie they weren't planning to eat. The peel curled in one long, soft ribbon, and with every slice of the knife, Courage's breath slowed a little more. That's nurturing, too, offering peace without demanding conversation, making someone feel less alone in their silence. Later, Muriel was outside tending to her herb patch. The wind had knocked over a few sprigs of sea lavender, and the soil was dry from the sun. She could have just left it. But she crouched down, hands in the dirt, and gently replanted the broken stalks. Courage stood at the window watching, and then he understood. Muriel didn't give up on things, just because they looked a little wilted. That afternoon, she sat Courage on the sofa, with his favorite old toy, the one with the missing ear, the one that used to squeak, but didn't anymore. You know, she said, some things stop making noise, but that doesn't mean they've stopped mattering. Courage rested his head on her lap again. Safe. Seen. The door creaked open suddenly. A gust of dry wind. A shadow passed by the porch, tall, strange, unfamiliar. Courage tensed. He let out a soft, uncertain growl. His ears stood straight. Muriel looked up calmly, set her knitting aside, and opened the door. Outside, it was just the traveling male fish. You poor thing, she said. You been walking in this heat? Come in for some water. The creature looked startled. No one had invited him in all day. Courage stared. Wasn't she afraid? But Muriel didn't fear things that looked different. She nurtured first and asked questions after. That night, Courage had a small cut on his paw. He hadn't even noticed, but Muriel did. She dabbed it with warm salt water, wrapped it in a soft bandage, and gave him a little kiss on the nose. There you are. Nothing too small to care for. Up next, the wind had calmed in nowhere, but the sky was still heavy, like it hadn't decided whether to cry or hold back. Inside the farmhouse, Muriel moved slowly, Not because she was tired, but because she believed in doing things gently. She folded Courage's blanket, fluffed his favorite cushion, and placed an extra biscuit on the saucer, even though he hadn't asked for one. "You always feel better when there's something sweet nearby," she whispered to herself. Courage peeked from under the table. He hadn't said a word since morning, just little sighs and quiet blinks. Muriel didn't ask what was wrong. She just opened her arms. And that's nurturing too, knowing that sometimes a hug says more than any question ever could. Later that day, a strange commercial played on the old TV, one of those glitchy, eerie broadcasts that made Courage's fur stand up. Eustace scoffed. "Just static. Get over it." But Courage couldn't. His paws shook. His breath hitched. His mind started spinning with all the bad things that might happen. Muriel didn't snap at Eustace. She didn't even look at the screen. She turned the TV off and turned on the old record player instead. A waltz. Faint and slow. The kind of music you can sway to even in your chair. Then she placed her hands on Courage's shoulders and said, "You're not silly. You're sensitive. And that's a kind of magic." Courage melted, like a snowflake finally touching a warm palm. That evening, they took a short walk out behind the house. The fields were quiet. Just a few fireflies blinking on, like tiny stars choosing to rise. Courage hesitated near the old scarecrow. Memories there. Not all good. Muriel noticed. She didn't pull him forward. She just knelt beside him, at his level, and said, "We don't have to visit the places that still ache, but we can stand nearby and remind them we're not afraid anymore." Courage inched closer. Not because the scarecrow stopped being scary, but because Muriel wasn't. That's nurturing. Standing beside someone in their fear without pushing them through it. Later, when the moon was high, Muriel brought out the old storybook. The pages were soft with age. The pictures faded. But the stories, they still carried light. She didn't read them in funny voices. Didn't rush the endings. She just spoke slowly, as if each word was being placed gently into the room like a fresh flower in a vase. Courage curled up near her feet, eyes fluttering. "Rest now," she whispered. "No one needs you to be brave right now. They just need you to be." The farmhouse was still. The kind of stillness that only comes after the day has exhaled and all the worries have been folded away like laundry. Courage was tucked into his small corner bed, blanket pulled to his chin, breath slow and deep. Muriel sat nearby in her favorite rocking chair, a cup of warm milk in her hands, and the radio playing a soft lullaby she used to hum when Courage was just a pup. She wasn't tired, but she stayed, because Courage always slept better when he knew she was close. Outside, the wind returned, but not in a scary way, just a reminder that the world kept turning, that seasons moved, that change would come. But for now, everything important was here. Everything safe was within arm's reach. Earlier that evening, Muriel had made time for everyone. Not because she had to, but because her heart didn't know how not to. She sewed the button back on Eustace's coat, reshelved the books that had fallen during the last spooky encounter, lit a candle near the window just in case someone lost in the fog needed a way home. And in the middle of all of it, she checked on Courage again. Not with words, not even with touch, just a quiet look that said, "I see you, and I always will." That's the thing about nurturing. It doesn't end when the chaos stops. It continues, like a heartbeat, like a lullaby. Muriel didn't always know the answers. She didn't always stop the monsters, but she was always there. Her love didn't depend on being needed. It simply was. She stood now, placed a soft hand over the Courage's blanket, and whispered the same thing she had whispered for years. Sleep well, love. You're safe here, even when you dream. Then she turned off the light and let the moon do the watching for a while. So now, dear listener, maybe you have a Muriel in your life. Or maybe you are the Muriel, the one who notices, the one who stays, the one who comforts quietly, even when no one says thank you. Either way, tonight you deserve the same care. Let someone, even if it's just this story, wrap you in stillness. Let the soft quilt of memory and the gentle voice of safety rock you into the deepest sleep. This was Muriel's nurturing, the first of her many beautiful qualities. There are more to explore, more quiet truths, more stories where the hero doesn't shout, but simply holds the world a little softer. Now we begin exploring her patience. It was a slow morning in nowhere. Eustace had misplaced his glasses again, accused Courage twice, slammed a drawer, and muttered words no one needed to hear before breakfast. Muriel stood at the stove, stirring porridge with a wooden spoon. She didn't flinch, didn't scold. She stirred once more, then set a small bowl in front of Eustace. Eat. You'll see clearer after, she said. And if not, I'll help you look. Courage peeked out from behind the chair, waiting for a storm. But none came. Just quiet spoons and a soft humming from the stove. That's patience. Responding to chaos with steadiness, not silence, not fear, but calm certainty. Later, Courage accidentally knocked over Muriel's favorite teacup. The one with the hand-painted flowers. The one she'd had since she was young. It shattered. Time froze. Courage trembled, already imagining the worst. But Muriel just sighed, sat down beside the broken pieces, ran her hand through his fur and said, "Well, things break, but we don't throw them away. We make room for new favorites." She didn't sweep the shards immediately. She sat with the loss. That was patience, too. That afternoon, a strange salesman came by the house. Said he could fix anything. Promised faster cooking, quicker chores, even a machine that could calm barking dogs instantly. Muriel smiled. "Some things aren't meant to be rushed," she said. "Especially dogs, especially hearts." The salesman left, confused. But Courage? He glowed a little brighter. Later that evening, Courage stood by the garden gate, staring at the mailbox. A letter from the vet was due, and vet letters always made him nervous. Muriel came beside him. Didn't say, "Don't worry." Didn't say, "You're being silly." She just stood there, silent, still present. "When you're ready, we'll open it together," she said. That's patience. Not pushing someone forward, but standing beside them until they take that step on their own. And that night, as rain tapped on the window, and the house filled with the soft smell of baked oats and clean laundry, Muriel rocked slowly in her chair, not waiting for sleep, not chasing it, just letting the night unfold. The winds in nowhere had stilled, not because the weather had calmed, but because Muriel was near. When she was close, even the strange creaks of the house seemed to soften. That morning, Courage was pacing again. Something in the air didn't feel right. No monsters yet, but his heart was already bracing. He walked in circles, checked the windows, tugged gently at Muriel's apron. She turned around, warm and calm as ever. Something's not sitting right, Well, we don't have to name it just yet. She knelt down, placed a cushion on the rug, and opened her arms wide, slow, still. Courage didn't come right away, but she didn't mind. She just kept humming, kept breathing, kept being there. That's patience. Not waiting for someone to speak, but making sure they know they're heard even before they say a word. Later, a box arrived. Tall, heavy, wrapped in dusty brown paper, with stamps from places no one had ever heard of. Eustace grabbed it first. "Probably another dumb thing you ordered." He rattled the box. Kicked it once. Courage yelped. But Muriel stepped in. Calmly, kindly. "Let's not open things in anger, Eustace. Even a box deserves gentleness." He huffed. Left it on the floor. Muriel placed it on the table with both hands. Ran her fingers along the edge. But she didn't open it yet. She waited. Some things reveal themselves better when we slow down. Courage sat close to her now. He wasn't sure what was inside the box, but something about the way she waited made it feel a little less scary. That's patience, too, making fear smaller by refusing to rush. Later in the day, Courage tried drawing something he saw in a dream. His little paws fumbled with crayons. Lines went crooked. Colors spilled. He growled. Tried to crumple the page. Muriel was nearby, tending to her potted lavender. She turned, wiping her hands. You don't have to get it right the first time, love. Sometimes it's the trying that matters most. She took the page, smoothed it gently, and placed it under a magnet on the fridge. You're learning, and that's always worth keeping. That evening, Courage lay under the table. The sunset cast long shadows across the floor. His thoughts were tangled. Memories from old adventures and old fears. He didn't move. Muriel didn't call out. She simply placed a tiny saucer of milk nearby, lit the lamp with the warm glow, and whispered just loud enough to carry. "No rush, dear. Just come when your heart says it's ready." And when he did, later, after the sun had disappeared, she was already there, still humming, still warm. It was one of those long, stretching afternoons in nowhere, when the wind barely moved, and the world seemed caught between dreams and waking. Muriel was out in the yard, her apron gently brushing the lavender as she walked. She moved like the sky did, slow and certain. Courage was nearby, watching a bird try and fail to take off again and again. Every time its little wings lifted, it stumbled, flapped, fell. Courage tilted his head, ready to panic, ready to fetch Muriel, ready to assume the worst. But she just watched quietly, hands folded gently before her. Sometimes the best thing we can do is let someone try a little longer. And sure enough, on the 5th try, the bird flew. Not far, not fast, but it flew. Muriel smiled. "There you go, love. You were never stuck. Just, not ready yet." That's patience, trusting in timing. Letting things bloom when they're meant to, not a moment before. Inside, the radio glitched, flickered between channels, then let out a loud screech. Courage yelped, jumped behind the couch. Eustace, of course, barked. "Dumb dog! It's just noise!" But Muriel, she walked over slowly, turned the dial gently with 2 fingers, then tapped the side twice like she was coaxing it, not commanding it. There. You just needed a moment, didn't you?" The radio clicked, hummed, and settled into a quiet old tune. Courage peeked out, ears lowering in relief. Muriel didn't scold the panic. She calmed the environment. That was her way. That evening, she baked a small pie, not because anyone asked, but because the kitchen felt a little too quiet. She hummed as she stirred. And when the crust didn't rise quite right, she just nodded at it. You did your best today. That's all I ever asked. Courage sat beside her, nose twitching at the smell of warm cinnamon. He didn't beg, didn't bark, just waited. Muriel smiled, cut a slice, and placed it in front of him. See, good things do come. Not fast, but just when you need them. Later, a knock came at the door. One of those eerie, echoing knocks that always meant trouble in nowhere. Eustace yelled not to open it. Courage shook with wide eyes. But Muriel, she didn't hurry to answer. She tied her apron, lit the front porch lamp, and whispered, "We don't greet the unknown in panic, but in preparation." She opened the door slowly. But it was only a package. A forgotten item she'd lent a neighbor long ago, returned in perfect condition. That night, Courage sat on the porch with her. The sky was ink dark. The air smelled of rosemary and warm dust. Muriel leaned back in her chair. Everything returns in time, love. Even peace. Especially peace. A stillness had settled over nowhere that evening. Even the windmill was quiet. No creaking. No distant howls. Just the steady ticking of the hallway clock. Courage lay curled up in the kitchen doorway, watching Muriel hum softly as she shelled peas. There wasn't much to do that day. No monsters. No visitors. No chores urgent enough to rush. Just slowness. But it wasn't boring. Not with Muriel. She moved like time didn't matter. Because with her, it didn't. You know, Courage, she said quietly. Not every moment needs to be filled. Some are meant to just be. That was Muriel's way. She didn't try to speed through the stillness. She honored it. Later, Eustace was muttering under his breath. He couldn't find his boots. He couldn't remember if he'd fed the chickens or if there were any chickens. He barked at the drawers. At the floor. At Courage, too. But Muriel just leaned over the porch rail and watching the sky turn slowly from orange to soft lilac. When he stormed out, barefoot and fuming, she simply said, "I'll make some tea for when you come back. You'll feel better by then." No anger. No hurry to fix. Just trust that time would smooth it over. Courage peeked up at her. How did she know? How could she wait so gracefully? She looked down and smiled. You don't rush people, dear. You leave the porch light on, and let them find their way back. Later, a spider appeared in the kitchen. Not scary, not big, just there. Courage panicked, of course. Ran in circles. Whimpered dramatically. Muriel walked over with a napkin, cupped the spider gently, and whispered to it as if it were a guest. You wandered in. Happens to all of us. But this isn't your home. Let's get you back to yours. She opened the back door and set it free into the garden. Then turned to Courage with a wink. See, not all surprises are here to hurt us. Some are just lost. That's patience, too. Making room for things and beings that others push away. That night, Courage kept tossing in his bed. He wasn't scared. Just uneasy. Muriel noticed from the hallway and then walked in with a small, lavender-scented handkerchief. She tucked it under his pillow, sat beside him for a while, and started humming a tune that had no beginning and no end. She didn't ask what was bothering him. She didn't try to chase sleep into him. She just kept humming. And eventually, his breathing slowed. The moon was climbing slowly over nowhere, a soft, pale coin in the sky, spilling light across the desert fields. The farmhouse was mostly quiet, except for the sound of Courage's tiny feet pacing across the hallway floor. He was trying to build something. A little model. Maybe a tower. Maybe a trap. Maybe a dream. But it kept tipping over. Little clinks. Little collapses. Again and again. He growled softly. Huffed. Almost gave up. Muriel walked by with a warm water bottle tucked under one arm. She paused, watched him silently from the doorway. Then she sat beside him on the floor. Didn't touch the model. Didn't offer advice. She just sat and began quietly threading a needle, something else that required patience. Courage looked over, confused. "You don't have to do this with me," he seemed to say with his eyes. But Muriel smiled. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm just here to wait with you. That's patience. The kind that says, I won't pull you forward, but I also won't walk away." Later that night, the light bulb in the hallway flickered. Then it went dark altogether. Eustace cursed from the other room. "Can't even walk to the bathroom in this place?" Muriel lit a candle. Not a big one. Just enough for Courage to see by. She didn't rush to replace the bulb. Didn't call attention to the inconvenience. She just made the night a little softer instead. Things don't always have to be fixed right away. Some things just need a little glow to get through. That's patience, too. Letting people adjust to the dark before you ask them to keep going. In the living room, the clock had stopped ticking. Courage noticed first. He tapped it, turned his head sideways. Muriel chuckled from her chair. Even time gets tired sometimes. Let it rest. She didn't wind it. She didn't panic. She just pulled her shawl over her shoulders and rocked gently in rhythm with her own breath. That rhythm was enough. Outside, the wind had picked up. That dry, nowhere wind that seemed to whisper half-formed stories into the window panes. Courage sat beside her now, ears lowered. Uncertain, she reached down slowly and placed a soft hand on his back. You don't have to be sure about everything. Some things feel strange before they feel safe. Later, just before bed, a letter arrived. It had no return address. The paper was crinkled, aged. Courage looked at it with wide eyes. He remembered other letters like this, some of them not so friendly. Muriel picked it up slowly. She held it, then set it down. It'll still be here tomorrow. We don't have to open everything the second it arrives. Courage blinked, then exhaled. That breath was all she needed to know. He felt safe again. Night had fully settled over nowhere. The stars blinked gently overhead, and even the wind seemed to tiptoe past the farmhouse. Muriel was in the sitting room, knitting a scarf she'd been working on for weeks. No deadline, no rush, just row after row of quiet intention. Courage lay curled nearby, his head resting on his paws, watching the yarn loop over and under, slow and steady. Every once in a while she paused, not because she lost count, but because she was thinking of something kind. "I wonder if you know how patient you've become," she said to him softly. Courage blinked. "You used to tremble at every knock. Now you wait beside me to see who's there." She reached down, smoothed the paw. "That's patience, too. And I see it." There was a calm in her presence, like a still pond that didn't mind how many stones were tossed in, because it always returned to stillness. Later that evening, one of Muriel's old records began skipping. A single piano note, over and over again, an echo caught in a loop. Courage jumped up to fix it. But Muriel just smiled and let it play a little longer. Sometimes things repeat themselves because they're not done yet, she whispered. Even in mistakes, there's a rhythm worth listening to. She lifted the needle slowly, placed it back at the beginning. The music played smooth and sweet again. That's patience. Not judging something by its glitch, but trusting that, with care, it can play beautifully again. Later, Eustace grumbled from the bedroom. Too cold. Where's my blanket? Muriel didn't rush, didn't roll her eyes. She folded the scarf she'd just finished and walked it over to him. He didn't thank her, but he curled into it anyway, and Muriel smiled like he had. Because sometimes patience means loving people long enough that even when they don't say thank you, they still feel it. Back in the hallway, Courage stared out the window. There was nothing out there, not tonight. But he stayed, watching. Muriel came up behind him and placed her hand gently on his back. It's okay to keep watch, but not forever. There's no shame in resting. So they sat, not speaking, not needing to, just being in a house where stillness wasn't empty. It was full of care. And now, sleepy soul, as we close this part of the journey, remember, Muriel's patience wasn't silence. It was a soft kind of love, the kind that waits and waits and never walks away. You don't need to finish everything tonight. You don't have to fix all the thoughts in your mind. You don't even need to know where you're going. Just rest. Let her energy wrap around you like a quilt that's been folded perfectly, over and over, with years of care stitched into every seam. Let's now begin the next gentle journey through another one of Muriel's remarkable qualities, compassion, a soft force, a healing hand. Compassion is what made Muriel more than just sweet. It made her deeply human, even in a world full of monsters and madness. When Courage was afraid, she comforted. When Eustace was cruel, she forgave. When strangers arrived at her doorstep, strained, broken, wild, or lost, Muriel never asked where they'd been. She just made tea and opened the door. Now we start with a story that might sound familiar. A visitor comes to nowhere. Not a monster, not quite a friend. Just someone hurting. It began on a quiet afternoon. Courage was digging a small hole in the backyard, searching for the lost squeaky bone he buried last summer. The air was warm. The birds were singing something old and familiar. Then a thump, a wheeze, a shadow. At the edge of the property stood a worn-down traveler. Their clothes tattered, their eyes dull, and their shoes practically falling apart. Eustace saw him first. "Bah, we don't need more trouble. Go on, get." Courage ducked behind Muriel. But Muriel didn't shout, didn't question. She walked right up to the stranger and said softly, "You look like you could use a seat and something warm." She didn't ask who he was, didn't ask why he was there. She simply saw him, and that was enough. That's compassion. Meeting someone at their worst and offering your best. She brought him inside, poured tea, set out fresh bread. The stranger didn't speak for a long time, but Muriel didn't fill the silence. She let it stretch, gave it space to become safety. "When you're ready," she said, "you can tell me what brought you here. Or you don't have to. Sometimes people just need kindness, not questions." Later that night, Courage found the man sitting on the porch, holding the chipped teacup Muriel had lent him. He looked lighter. Courage offered him a blanket. The man accepted it and smiled, for the first time. That's the quiet ripple of Muriel's compassion. It teaches others how to carry warmth forward. That evening, a strange moth fluttered into the house. Courage tried to catch it, thinking it might be dangerous. But Muriel cupped her hands gently. Even the smallest things deserve kindness. She let it land on her finger, whispered something Courage couldn't hear, then let it fly out the window. And Courage? He sat with that. He thought about it long after the lights were out and the house had fallen silent. He thought about how Muriel never needed people to earn her care. She just gave it, freely, softly, always. Next day, the sky over nowhere was bruised with purple clouds that evening. Rain was on its way, not a storm, just a slow, heavy kind of drizzle. Muriel had set a kettle on the stove, and Courage was curled on the windowsill, watching as the first raindrops painted the glass. Then a mica knock. Not hurried, not threatening, just soft, unsure. Courage peeked out nervously. Eustace grumbled from his chair. "Don't open it. Probably some weirdo." But Muriel didn't hesitate. She opened the door. There stood a young creature, part dog, part something else. Tattered cloak, mismatched eyes, soaked through. Not dangerous, just frightened. It didn't speak. It didn't growl. It just stood, shaking. Muriel looked at it for one long, quiet second, and opened her arms. That's compassion. Seeing pain before it asks to be seen. She led the creature inside. I toweled off its fur and set out a plate of soft biscuits. It didn't eat right away. It didn't even sit. It just watched her. Like it didn't know if it was allowed. Muriel smiled. "You don't have to know how to be here, dear. You already are. And that's enough." Courage stayed close, uncertain at first. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He watched Muriel and how she was treating the stranger exactly like she always treated him. Gently, patiently, with full-hearted welcome. Later that night, the rain grew heavier. The guest fell asleep by the fireplace. Muriel placed a fresh blanket over its shoulders, tucked it in without a word. Eustace rolled his eyes. "It'll just leave in the morning, why bother?" Muriel looked at him quietly. "Because leaving warm is better than leaving cold. That's compassion. Knowing someone might not stay, but choosing to love them anyway." The next day, the creature did leave. Didn't say thank you. Didn't even look back. But Muriel just smiled as it disappeared into the hills. "Kindness doesn't need to be remembered," she said. "It just needs to be given." Later that afternoon, Courage saw her in the garden. She was tending to a flower bed, one that hadn't bloomed in months. Still watering it. Still humming. He tilted his head, curious. "Why do you care for something that doesn't grow?" She wiped her hands on her apron. "Because maybe one day it will. And if not, it still deserved my time." That's the heart of Muriel's compassion. It's not based on results. It's based on presence. Dear listener, let's walk gently onward. It was quiet in the farmhouse. A kind of soft quiet, not empty, not lonely. Just peaceful. Muriel was in her rocking chair, threading buttons onto an old sweater. Courage lay near her feet, chewing gently on a toy shaped like a slipper. Then from outside, a crack, a thump. Courage jolted up, ears high, eyes wide. Another crash. Something had fallen out by the old shed. Muriel stood slowly, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped out into the dusk. Courage followed, heart pounding. Behind the shed, huddled in the dirt, was a creature they'd never seen before. It looked strange, half-formed, all limbs, too many eyes. It trembled, blinking rapidly, clearly terrified. Courage instinctively growled, unsure. "Muriel?" She knelt down. "You poor thing," she whispered. "You're shaking." She didn't ask what it was. She didn't flinch at its shape. She only saw what mattered. It was hurting. That's compassion. Caring for the wounded, not just the familiar. The creature whimpered as she reached forward, but she didn't force it. Just held out her hand. Palm up. Still, open. "No one's going to hurt you here," she said. And after a moment, it crept forward. One step, then another. And finally its head rested against her palm. Muriel wrapped it gently in an old flannel blanket, tucked it inside a box lined with straw, left a bowl of water nearby. Didn't try to cage it. Didn't try to fix it. She just made it safe. You can stay as long as you need, and leave when you're ready. "Back inside," Eustace grumbled. "Why do you bring those weird things home? One of them's going to turn on you someday." Muriel smiled faintly. Kindness doesn't come with guarantees, but neither does cruelty. Later that night, the creature let out a low, rattling cry. Courage leapt from his bed, nervous. But Muriel was already up lighting a candle. She walked to the window. She whispered through the glass. "You're safe, even in your worst moments." And somehow the cries quieted. That's compassion. Not just soothing what looks broken, but staying close when someone is unraveling. In the days that followed, the creature began to change. It blinked slower, ate more, stopped hiding. Not because Muriel made it, but because she waited for it. One morning it was gone. Not a trace. Just the empty box and the blanket left folded neatly. Muriel found a small wildflower in its place, tucked between the buttons of the sweater she'd mended. She held it for a long while, then placed it in the window. No tears, just warmth. "Some goodbyes come with thanks," she whispered, "even if they're silent." The day had been long and nowhere. Not because anything went wrong, but because everything just felt a little heavier. Eustace had been moodier than usual. The garden hadn't sprouted its usual blooms. And Courage, well, he'd had that nervous little wiggle in his walk all afternoon. Muriel noticed, of course. She always noticed. But she didn't ask questions right away. She just hummed quietly as she stirred something warm and sweet in a big old pot on the stove. Later, Courage paced in front of the back door, tail drooping, paws twitching. Muriel opened the door before he even scratched it. "Need some fresh air, do you, love?" She walked with him. No flashlight, no destination. Just slow steps through the dry grass, letting the moonlight guide them. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. That's compassion. Knowing someone needs company, without needing them to explain why. Eventually, they sat near the old fence. Courage curled close beside her feet. The wind was gentle, rustling the weeds just enough to sound like a hush. Then from the distance, they heard something. Not a growl. Not a monster. Just crying. A soft, whimpering sound coming from behind a pile of stones. Courage looked up. Ears perked. A little afraid, but also curious. Muriel didn't hesitate. She followed the sound and found a creature small, covered in fur and feathers. tucked in on itself like it was trying to disappear. Muriel knelt slowly. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "You don't have to be alone out here." She didn't ask what happened. She didn't try to move it. She just sat nearby and started humming, the same lullaby she'd hummed when Courage was scared as a pup. It took a long while, but eventually the creature unfolded just slightly and blinked at her through tired eyes. That's compassion, creating safety, even in silence. She didn't bring it home. Not all hurting things are ready for homes. But she left some food, a soft scrap of fabric. And Courage, he left behind his favorite chew toy. No one asked him to. He just did, because he'd learned from her. "Back at the house," Eustace barked from inside. "You let that dog drag you out again?" Muriel chuckled. "No, dear. He took me for a walk this time." She poured a second bowl of warm stew and placed it on the table across from Courage. "Even if no one's sitting there," she said softly, "it's good to make space. You never know who'll need it next." And that's compassion. Preparing comfort for someone before they even arrive. Later, as the house settled and the fire dimmed, Muriel sat back in her rocking chair, eyes half closed. She wasn't tired, just full in that peaceful way you feel after loving well. She looked down at Courage, say, already half asleep on his little cushion. "You did a kind thing today, my love," she whispered, "and I hope that kindness wraps around you now." The morning had come with a strange chill, not a cold wind exactly, but a feeling like the sky had forgotten how to smile. Courage sat by the window, head resting on her windowsill. He wasn't sad, just still. Muriel noticed. She didn't say, "What's wrong?" She didn't ask him to speak. She simply placed a warm mug beside him, goat's milk with a hint of honey, then sat in the rocking chair and began to hum. That's compassion. Knowing that presence can be more healing than words. Outside, a stray balloon floated across the yard. It was red, tattered, still trying to float even though its string dragged through the dirt. Courage tilted his head. Muriel stood up and walked outside. She didn't chase the balloon. She waited for the wind to slow, then gently reached out and took hold of its string. "Even when something's worn out," she said, "it's still trying. And that deserves a gentle hand." She tied it to the porch railing. Let it dance there. Let it rest. Later that day, a familiar face returned to the farmhouse. The traveler from weeks ago. The one who hadn't said thank you. The one who'd left quietly in the rain. But this time, he had something in his hands. A gift, a scarf, woven from scraps and threadbare yarn. Muriel smiled, but didn't act surprised. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said gently. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." Courage watched closely. He'd seen how Muriel gave without needing anything back, and how, somehow, that kindness always found its way home again. That's compassion. Giving without expectation, and receiving without judgment. That evening, a strange call came through the old rotary phone. Static, then a cry, then silence. Muriel didn't panic. She didn't hang up. She held the phone close and whispered, "I don't know who you are, but I'm here, and you're not alone." Courage watched her with wide eyes. There was no one speaking back. But she stayed on the line anyway, just in case someone was listening. That's compassion, too. Offering comfort even when you don't know where it's going. Later that night, the balloon outside had slipped loose. It floated up, then drifted into the distance. Muriel stood on the porch watching it disappear into the clouds. Courage stood beside her. "That's okay," she said softly. "Sometimes things leave better than they arrived." And she turned back inside, without sadness, without trying to hold on, because that too was love. The moon was high again. Not full, not new, just enough to light the roof of the farmhouse, where shadows danced slow and small. Inside, all was still. Courage was tucked into his little bed, but sleep hadn't come yet. He kept glancing toward the hallway, waiting. For what? Even he wasn't sure. Muriel had noticed. She always did. And so, with no words, she entered the room and sat beside him, knitting in her lap. That's compassion. Not showing up with answers, just showing up. She didn't say, "You're scared again?" She didn't ask, "What's wrong this time?" She simply began to hum. That same tune she'd always hummed when courage was very small, and the world felt far too big. It wrapped around the room like a lullaby quilt. Courage finally closed his eyes, but not out of exhaustion, out of trust. Outside, a tumbleweed skittered across the sand. The wind had picked up, and, bringing with it the distant cries of something unknown, Eustace barked from the next room. "Turn that racket off." Muriel chuckled softly, and said to no one in particular, "It's not a racket. It's someone trying to be heard." That's compassion. Hearing even what others try to silence. As the house settled again, Muriel rose quietly and made her way to the kitchen. She placed an extra teacup on the table. Why? No reason. Just habit. Hope. Love. Sometimes, she said, I set a place for the lonely, even if they don't show up. Because compassion isn't just a reaction. It's a way of living. A decision to always leave room for someone, even if they never knock. Later that night, the front door creaked. Not open, not shut. Just moved a little by the wind. Muriel didn't get up to close it, and she just whispered, "If you need to come in, love." The kettle's still warm. Courage blinked from his blanket. There was no visitor, and yet he felt safer than ever. That's the heart of Muriel's compassion. Not dramatic, not grand, just consistent. Steady? There. So now, sleepy listener, as you drift to the edge of sleep, with your thoughts curling like vines in the quiet, remember this. You don't need to be healed to be held. You don't need to be fixed to be loved. Muriel wouldn't ask you to change. She would only sit quietly beside your tired soul and whisper, "Take your time, my dear. I've left the light on, not loud or flashy, but steady." Gratitude was the gentle way Muriel saw beauty in the ordinary. She gave thanks for small things, a warm breeze, a cup of tea, a quiet moment with courage, and in doing so, she reminded us, joy doesn't come from having more. It comes from noticing what's already here. Let's begin. It began on a soft, golden morning in nowhere. The kind of morning where the sky feels kind, where the clouds move slowly, as if they've got nowhere to be. Muriel opened the back door and stepped out into the garden barefoot. The grass was cool. The breeze whispered through her hair. And there, growing quietly under the window, was a single violet blossom. She knelt beside it, ran her fingers gently along its petals. "Well, aren't you brave?" she said softly. "Blooming out here, all on your own." She didn't pick it. She didn't post about it. She just smiled and whispered two small words that held the weight of the world. "Thank you." That's gratitude. Not needing more, just noticing what already is. Back inside, Eustace was complaining about the toast being too hard, about the jam being too warm, about the eggs being too yellow. Muriel placed the plate gently in front of him anyway. "Isn't it nice to have food at all, dear?" she said without judgment. Just truth. Courage from under the table gave her a soft look. Muriel smiled and winked. "Some things you just have to appreciate quietly," she whispered. Later that day, the power flickered. The wind outside had picked up again, dust curling through the sky like a spell unraveling. Muriel lit a candle. Just one. And she looked at it like it was a small miracle. "So many places in the world," she said softly. "And we get to be right here, right now. Isn't that something?" Courage tilted his head. He hadn't thought of it that way. But now, he would. That's gratitude. Turning a flickering moment into something sacred. As night settled in, Muriel sat at the window with a cup of chamomile tea. She didn't sigh about what the day didn't bring. She didn't long for something more exciting. She simply looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, day, for letting me see you." The sun was sinking gently behind the fields. Golden light spilled across the kitchen floor. Courage padded in, dragging an old slipper. It squeaked twice off-key and made Muriel laugh softly. "That silly noise again," she said. "And yet it makes this old kitchen feel like home." She picked up the slipper and placed it on the counter like it was something precious. Because to her, it was. That's gratitude. Not waiting for perfect moments, but making ordinary ones feel sacred. That evening, Eustace knocked over a glass. It shattered. He growled. Courage jumped back with a yelp. Muriel swept it up quietly, then smiled at Courage. "At least now I get to wash this floor I've been putting off," she said with a wink. Courage tilted his head. She wasn't pretending it was fun. She just found something to be thankful for, even in the mess. Outside, the wind began to shift. Dust blew softly through the yard, and in the far distance, a storm cloud formed over the dry hills. Courage looked worried. Muriel noticed, of course. "We can't stop the wind," she said gently, "but we can be thankful we're not out in it." She pulled down the thick curtains, lit a candle. The farmhouse glowed, and for a moment, nowhere felt like the center of the universe. That's gratitude. Not for the storm, but for the shelter. Later, Muriel sat on the back porch with a basket of clothes that needed folding. Courage sat beside her, watching the sky. The clouds were moving fast now, but there was a break in them, only a band of pink and gold light that shimmered like ribbon. Muriel didn't grab her camera, didn't call Eustace. She just looked and whispered, "Thank you, sky, for reminding me beauty still exists, even when it's rushing by." She folded a towel, folded it again, and Courage laid his head on her lap. That's gratitude, making peace with fleeting things and loving them anyway. As night crept in and the wind picked up, Muriel placed a soft hand on Courage's back. "We're lucky, you know," she said. "Not because everything is easy, but because we have each other." Courage closed his eyes. He didn't need anything else. The next morning arrived quietly in nowhere. No bird song, no wind, just a soft silver light spilling across the fields. Muriel was already awake. She stood at the kitchen sink, watching the steam rise from her teacup, hands wrapped around it like it was something fragile and holy. Courage patted in sleepily. He tilted his head. Muriel looked down, smiling. "There's something lovely about mornings, Courage. They don't ask you to be ready. They just show up, And that's enough. That's gratitude. Appreciating the gentle arrival of a new day, without needing it to impress you. As Courage chewed on a biscuit, Muriel pulled an old photo album from the shelf. She wiped the dust from its cover, say, and opened it slowly page by page. Old photos. Faded smiles. Moments long gone, but still living inside her. She paused at one picture. A picnic under the windmill years ago. Courage, still a pup. Eustace actually smiling. That was a good day, she whispered. And she didn't wish to go back. She didn't ache with longing. She just felt thankful that it happened at all. Later, a strong wind swept through the fields. It knocked over a flower pot on the porch. Spilled soil across the step. Muriel walked out with a broom, brushed it away softly. It'll give the earth something new to grow, she said. Sometimes even messes have purpose. Courage helped in his own tiny way, nudging the pot upright with his nose. Muriel laughed. That's gratitude. Seeing growth where others only see inconvenience. That evening, the farmhouse felt colder than usual. A light flickered. The soup didn't quite thicken, right? The radio played the same old tune again. But Muriel? She stirred the soup, humming along. She set the table with chipped dishes. Placed a wildflower in a water glass. Everything's a little worn, she said. But that's how you know it's been loved. Courage wagged his tail once slowly. He was learning. And just before bed, Muriel took out her knitting again. She worked on a scarf no one knew for whom. Maybe just the world. And as she stitched, she whispered softly to no one in particular. Thank you for another day. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be mine. The skies over nowhere were cloudy that day. Not stormy, not bright. Just that soft kind of gray that makes the whole world whisper. Muriel sat on the porch with a piece of bread dough in her lap. She wasn't kneading it anymore. Just holding it there, letting it rise beside her, as if it too needed the open air. Courage trotted out, a little sleepy-eyed, and curled near her feet. Muriel looked down and smiled. You always know when I need company, she said softly. That's something to be thankful for. That's gratitude. Noticing the comfort someone gives, even without saying a word. Inside, Eustace had fallen asleep in his chair. A newspaper still draped over his chest. Mouth slightly open. Snoring just enough to sound like an old engine. Muriel passed him a blanket, tucking it around his knees. She didn't expect a thank you. She didn't need one. It's not for thanks, she whispered. It's because I can. Later, she opened a small wooden drawer in the hallway, one filled with buttons and scraps, ribbons, coins, little broken things. Things others would throw away. But Muriel kept them. Everything has a story, she said. And stories deserve a soft place to rest. She held up a tiny bell. It didn't ring anymore. Still, she turned it in her fingers gently. Like it mattered. Because it did. That's gratitude. Not just for what something does, but for what it once meant. That night, the windmill creaked in the dark. Its old wooden blades turned slowly. Courage looked out the window, a little anxious. Muriel joined him, holding a candle in one hand, a plate of shortbread in the other. Let the wind turn, dear, she said. It reminds us we're still here, still turning, too. She placed a piece of shortbread beside Courage. Not a reward, not a bribe, just a gesture. Because love to Muriel was shown in the smallest, simplest ways. That's gratitude, making rituals out of kindness, turning care into habit. And just before bed, she stood at the front door. Didn't open it. Didn't lock it. just placed her hand gently on the knob and whispered, "Thank you, house, for holding us again." It was raining in nowhere. Not a storm. Just a steady, soft drizzle, the kind that taps against the window like it's trying to be polite. Muriel stood in the kitchen drying spoons. There wasn't much to do. No guests. No monsters. No chores left waiting. Just the sound of water on the roof and the hum of old wood settling. "Some days give you excitement," she said aloud, "and some just give you time to breathe." She folded the last dish towel carefully, then sat in her rocking chair by the window. Courage climbed up beside her, curling like a comma against her hip. That's gratitude. Finding beauty in a day that asks nothing of you. Eustace grumbled about the rain, of course. He didn't like wet socks or muddy floors. But Muriel just watched the drops slide down the glass. "It's not trying to ruin anything," she whispered. "It's just being rain." She didn't fight the weather. She welcomed it. Like an old friend who came to slow everything down. She pulled a notebook from the side table. A plain one. Worn edges. No fancy cover. Inside, she kept a list, not of tasks, but of thanks. She wrote down things most folks would forget. The sound Courage makes when he stretches. A warm spoon from a fresh cup of tea. Waking up and realizing the nightmare was just a dream. She didn't read the list often. She just liked adding to it, because noticing was its own kind of joy. That's gratitude. Noticing what others rush past and letting it mean something to you. That afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. No sender's name. Inside, a small box of seeds. Different shapes, colors, textures. Muriel smiled. "Looks like someone wanted us to keep growing." She didn't wonder who sent them. She simply got up, or wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped into the drizzle. She planted the seeds quietly. No ceremony. No rush. Just thanks. "We'll see what you become," she whispered to the soil. That's gratitude. Welcoming the unknown, and choosing to trust it anyway. As night returned, Courage curled up near the stove. Muriel lit a candle, even though the light still worked. "You don't always light a candle because it's dark," she said softly. "Sometimes you light it just because it's lovely." She sat there a long time, not because she had to, just because she wanted to. "I love this house," she said, "and I wanted to know." The storm had passed. The sky over nowhere was deep and still, the kind of dark that feels like velvet. Stars blinked quietly above the farmhouse. Inside, the air was calm. Everything felt washed clean. Muriel stood at the back door holding a warm cup of tea. She wasn't doing anything else. Just standing. Looking. Breathing. "It's a gift, this stillness," she whispered. "And I don't ever want to take it for granted." Courage was already curled up nearby, eyes heavy, but still awake, just enough to watch her. She smiled down at him. "So many people chase big things," she said. "But I found peace in the little ones." She looked up at the stars, like this night, like you, like the sound of quiet breathing in a safe place. That's gratitude, not for what you've earned, but for what you've been lucky enough to love. Later, she placed a hand on the old wall by the staircase, ran her fingers across its worn wood. Each creak, each crack, a part of a story. "Thank you for holding us all these years," she whispered. Then she turned toward the shelf of old cookbooks, the basket of yarn, the pictures of younger days. None of it was expensive, none of it perfect, and yet her eyes softened. Because gratitude makes everything glow a little. Eustace shuffled in, rubbing his eyes. Still up, he muttered. Muriel nodded. Just saying goodnight to the house? He raised an eyebrow, grumbled something half asleep, and padded off. But courage stayed, and Muriel sat beside him on the floor. Not because it was more comfortable, but because it felt right. She placed her hand gently on his back. I never wanted a brave dog, she said. Just a kind one. And that's what you are, my love. Courage nuzzled closer. That's gratitude. Thanking someone for simply being, not for what they do. The candle flickered softly as Muriel began to hum. Just a few notes, old and familiar. Courage's eyes closed. Muriel's head leaned back against the wall. So now, sweet dreamer, as this quiet journey ends, and your body sinks deeper into rest, let this final thought stay with you. Gratitude doesn't fix everything, but it makes everything softer. The bed you lie in soft. The story you heard gentle. The breath you take right now enough. You don't need to chase more tonight. You only need to whisper, whether out loud or in your heart, thank you. For this day, for this story, for this life, however it looked. Let's continue our peaceful walk through Muriel's heart. The next quality we'll explore is her gentleness. Now the story begins. It was a quiet day in nowhere, not unusually peaceful, just a little slower than usual. The wind wasn't in a hurry. The trees were half asleep. Even the tumbleweeds paused at the edge of the road, as if they too needed a break. Muriel was in the garden, not planting, not weeding, just sitting, hands folded in her lap, eyes watching the butterflies pass between the petunias. Courage sat beside her, tail gently thumping the dirt. It's not about getting everything done, she said softly. It's about being kind to the moment. That's gentleness. Giving the world and yourself permission to breathe. Back in the farmhouse, Eustace had knocked over his toolbox. Screws rolled across the floor. He cursed. He stomped. Muriel walked in quietly and began picking them up one by one. No lecture. No eye roll. Just soft hands gathering what had been scattered. It's all right, she said gently. Things fall apart sometimes. Doesn't mean they're ruined. Courage helped too, nudging a bolt into her hand. Later that day, Muriel found a small sparrow pressed against the window, dazed. It must have flown into the glass too hard. Its tiny body trembled. Muriel scooped it up with a cloth, held it gently in her palm. She didn't panic. She didn't try to fix it. She just whispered, "You're all right, little one. Take your time." And sat there holding stillness. The bird fluttered away 10 minutes later, and Muriel smiled like she'd been given a gift. Because she had. That's gentleness, holding space for healing, without forcing it to happen faster. That evening, Courage accidentally spilled a bowl of water in the hallway. He froze, ears low. Expecting scolding, Muriel walked over slowly, kneeled down. "We'll clean it up, love," she said. "No harm done." She didn't raise her voice, didn't sigh, just dried the floor and dried his little paws after. That's gentleness, responding with softness, even when you had every excuse to be sharp. Next day, the sun was low in the sky. That golden hour when everything looks like it's wrapped in honey. Muriel stood at the sink washing dishes. Not because they were piling up, but because she liked the way warm water felt on her hands. Courage sat on the floor nearby, watching the last rays of sunlight slide across the tiles. Muriel didn't rush. She hummed. That same tune she always hummed. The one Courage had heard since he was just a pup. The house seemed to breathe along with her. That's gentleness. Doing simple things slowly, as if they're sacred. A knock came at the door. Not urgent. Not expected. Muriel dried her hands and opened it. There stood a traveler, muddy boots, tired eyes, holding an empty canteen. He didn't ask for anything, but Muriel smiled like she'd been waiting for him all day. "Come in, love," she said, "and sit a while. No questions. No judgment. Just warmth." She handed him a towel for his hands. Set a glass of water down. Brought out a slice of fresh bread with a bit of peach jam. That's gentleness. Welcoming others before they even find the words to ask. Courage peeked around the corner. He wasn't sure about strangers. But Muriel gave him that look, the one that said, "You're safe. So is he." And Courage, trusting her as always, sat beside the man. They didn't talk much. Just shared space. And sometimes, that's all gentleness really is. Later that evening, Eustace stubbed his toe on a step. He shouted. Grumbled about fixing that thing for years. Muriel helped him sit down. Brought him a sock filled with warm rice. "Put this on your foot," she said. "You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt." Eustace didn't say thank you. Didn't say much of anything. But he left the sock on. And that said enough. That's gentleness. Letting people be human, even the prickly ones. As the stars came out, Muriel stepped into the garden. The traveler was gone now, but the chair he sat in was still warm. She placed a candle there. Just a little one. A flicker. As if to say, "You're welcome back any time." The wind was gentle tonight. It moved like a lullaby across the fields, tugging at curtains, brushing the porch steps clean. Inside the farmhouse, the world felt slow. Not stuck, just calm. Like it had nowhere better to be. Muriel sat with Courage on the couch, her fingers moving slowly through yarn. She wasn't really knitting. She was just touching softness, letting the texture keep her company. Courage yawned. Muriel smiled. "Tired, love?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. But she didn't need one. She already knew. That's gentleness. Understanding without demanding. Eustace had fallen asleep in his chair again. Mouth slightly open. One slipper missing. Muriel didn't wake him. She didn't tease him. She simply draped a quilt across his lap, tucked the edge under his arm like she had 100 times before. Then she turned the radio down so the static wouldn't startle him when he stirred. That's gentleness. Doing small kindnesses no one will ever notice and doing them anyway. In the hallway, the old grandfather clock chimed once. Just once. That soft kind of sound that feels like time bowing its head. Muriel whispered to Courage. That's our reminder, isn't it? To slow down. To speak kindly. To leave a light on. She stood up, lit a small lamp by the front door. Even though no one was coming. Even though everyone was already home. Sometimes you leave the light on, she said. For the parts of yourself that haven't made it back yet. Courage curled up in his bed near the hearth. Muriel placed a small hand-knit blanket over him. It didn't quite fit. But it didn't have to. He looked up once, and Muriel just said, "Shh, you're okay." That's gentleness. Wrapping someone in peace without needing a reason. Outside, the stars blinked slowly and like sleepy fireflies resting between breaths. Muriel stepped out onto the porch for a moment. The air was cool. The world was quiet. She didn't pray. She didn't plan. She just said softly, "Thank you, Night, for letting me be kind today." Then she went back inside, closed the door without a sound. It was one of those chilly mornings in nowhere, where the grass stays quiet under frost, and the sky holds its breath a little longer. Muriel was already up, quietly tying her apron in the kitchen. She didn't clatter the dishes. She didn't flip on the light. She moved like a whisper, as if she didn't want to wake the walls. Courage peeked around the corner, his ears still drooping with sleep. Muriel smiled. "Morning, love," she said gently. "No rush. Come when you're ready." She poured water into the kettle and placed it slowly on the stove. No hurrying, no noise, just small movements filled with care. That's gentleness, moving through the world in a way that doesn't startle it. Outside, the windmill creaked. The breeze picked up. Muriel stepped out and laid a soft cloth over her garden beds. The cold would pass. But she didn't want the flowers to be surprised. "You don't leave something you love uncovered," she said softly. "Even if it's strong, especially if it is." She patted the cloth gently, then turned to go inside, a hand brushing the railing with that same quiet affection. Eustace grumbled about the weather, about his sore back, about the slippers not being where he left them. Muriel found them under the couch, wiped them with a warm cloth, placed them neatly at his feet. "Here you are, dear," she said. "No harm done. That's gentleness, not taking things personally, when someone else forgets how to be kind." Later, Courage brought her a broken toy. The stuffing was coming out. One ear was missing. He dropped it in her lap like a confession. Muriel didn't laugh, didn't scold. She picked it up, turned it gently in her hands. "Still worth loving," she whispered. "Maybe even more so now." She reached for her sewing basket, started to mend it slowly, her stitches like quiet promises. That's gentleness. Restoring instead of replacing, mending instead of mourning. As dusk began to fall, Muriel sat by the window again. The house was quiet. Courage curled near her feet. She looked out at the fields, golden edges blurring into blue. "What a soft kind of day," she whispered. Not loud, not important, but full of tiny, loving things. Evening had settled softly over nowhere. The kind of evening where the sky fades slow and the world feels like it's exhaling. Muriel was in her rocking chair, a basket of fresh laundry at her side. She wasn't folding in a hurry. Each towel was folded like a bedtime prayer. Courage watched from the rug, eyes half closed. The room was warm, still, safe. Muriel folded the last towel, placed it gently in the basket, then reached down to pat Courage's head. "There," she said softly. "Even little things deserve care. That's gentleness. Treating ordinary moments like they matter. Because they do." Eustace wandered in, muttering about static on the radio. He tapped it too hard. The dial spun. The music hiccuped. Muriel walked over slowly, turned the volume down, and adjusted the antenna with her fingertips. Soft jazz returned. A saxophone, barely louder than a breath. "It's just a little off," she said. "Not broken, just needs a gentle hand." Eustace grunted. Didn't say thank you. Muriel didn't mind. Outside wind pressed gently against the windows. A hush moved through the garden. Muriel lit a candle in the hallway. Not because it was dark and neat, but because soft light to her was a way of saying welcome. That's gentleness. Making spaces feel safe, even when no one's watching. Later, as Courage tiptoed across the hallway, he knocked over a small vase. It shattered quietly. Just a few pieces. He froze. But Muriel came quickly, not with scolding, but with a broom and a calm voice. "It's all right, dear," she said. "Accidents don't make you bad." She swept the pieces with slow hands, then took Courage's paw and looked it over. No cuts. Still whole. She kissed his forehead. That's gentleness. Responding to mistakes with love, not shame. As night deepened, Muriel stepped onto the porch again. The sky was full of stars tonight, more than usual. She didn't name them. Didn't wish on them. She just looked. "They're shining whether I see them or not," she whispered. "But I'm glad I looked." She sat in the quiet, rocking slowly, letting the stillness stretch wide around her. Night had fully arrived in nowhere. Not loud, not sudden. Just a hush falling over everything, like a warm quilt pulled up to the sky's chin. Inside the farmhouse, every room was dim. A lamp glowed in the corner. The floorboards whispered with age, and in the quiet center of it all, Muriel moved slowly, like always. She was tucking things away. A folded shawl. A book closed with care. A teacup rinsed clean and set upside down to dry. Courage watched her from across the room, half asleep, curled into the shape of peace. Muriel didn't speak. She didn't need to. Sometimes, gentleness is loudest in silence. Eustace coughed from the next room. Grumbled something about the window being drafty. Muriel didn't roll her eyes. Didn't sigh. She walked in, closed the window softly, tucked the blanket around him again. "There you go," she whispered, all tucked in. She didn't do it because he was kind. She did it because she was. That's gentleness, being good, even when others forget how. Muriel returned to her chair, sat down with a soft thump, and looked out across her little home. She didn't see chores. She didn't see mess. She saw belonging. And that, too, is a form of love. She looked down at Courage. He was twitching in his sleep, chasing something in his dreams. Muriel reached out, placed a gentle hand on his back, and said only, "Shh, you're here. You're safe." His breathing slowed. That's gentleness. Soothing without needing to solve. The windmill outside turned just a little. One slow creak. Then still, Muriel let the silence deepen. She wasn't afraid of it. She trusted it. Because when the world is quiet, you can finally hear what your heart is saying. And tonight, Muriel's heart whispered, "Thank you for this home, for this peace, for this soft little life. So now, dear sleepy heart, as you rest your head and let your muscles loosen, may you feel Muriel's gentleness wrapped around you like a handmade quilt. You are not too much. You are not too little. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. Softly. Gently. Just as you're meant to. We're going to float into a gentler space where curiosity is quiet magic, and everything, even the weirdest moment, is worth marveling at. Tonight's story is about Muriel's sense of wonder. It started with a sound, not a crash, not a roar, just a little plink, like a raindrop that had lost its way. Muriel looked up from her tea. There, right on the windowsill, was a tiny, glowing pebble. Not warm, not cold, just shimmering, gently pulsing with a soft pink light. Courage was already tiptoeing toward it, his big eyes full of questions. But Muriel, she just smiled. "Oh," she whispered, "how marvelous." She didn't ask where it came from. She didn't ask if it was dangerous. She just wondered. That's wonder, pausing to admire something before rushing to define it. Muriel reached out, touched the pebble with her finger. It blinked once, a soft spark. She laughed. Not a big laugh. Just one of those little, round chuckles that wraps around a room. Some things don't need to make sense, she said. Some things just need to be seen. The wind outside picked up, and suddenly the sky above nowhere shimmered like a curtain of stars was being drawn across it. Purple, green, silver. The northern lights? And nowhere? Courage gasped. Muriel leaned against the doorframe and watched, hand over her heart. Would you look at that? She breathed. Even here, even now. That's wonder. Letting yourself be amazed when the world gives you a reason. Later that evening, a strange creature appeared at the edge of the garden. Not scary, not sweet, just strange. 4 eyes, tiny wings, and what looked like a spoon for a nose. Courage yelped. Muriel stepped outside. She didn't shout, didn't run. She knelt in the grass. Hello, wee thing, she said. Aren't you just the oddest delight? The creature tilted its head, fluttered its wings. And Muriel? She offered it a bit of cornbread. That's wonder. Meeting the unknown with kindness instead of fear. As night fully settled in, Muriel returned to her rocking chair. The glowing pebble now rested on her windowsill like a second moon. She didn't look for meaning. She didn't need answers. It's enough, she said, to be here, to see. The pebble on the windowsill hadn't dimmed. In fact, sometime in the night, it had begun to glow just a little brighter. Muriel noticed it first. She was up early before the birds. The farmhouse was still. Even Eustace hadn't stirred. She stood by the window with her cup of tea, watching as the tiny pink light blinked in rhythm, almost like it was breathing. Courage rubbed his eyes, padding softly into the room. Muriel turned to him and smiled. Some things are most beautiful before anyone else wakes up, she whispered. He looked at the pebble, then at her, then back at the pebble, and he sat quietly beside her. That's wonder. Being present before the world has a chance to distract you. Outside, the sky began to stretch and yawn, colors soft like melting sherbet. No loud sunrise, just a gentle curtain lifting. Muriel stepped onto the porch, Courage following behind. The strange creature from the night before was still in the garden, nestled in a bundle of weeds. Muriel leaned on the railing. You stayed, she said kindly. Well, how lovely of you. She didn't try to name it down. Didn't wonder what it should be doing. She simply welcomed its being. That's wonder. Letting strange things exist without needing to control them. Muriel made breakfast, not because she was hungry, but because the morning asked for it. Eggs, toast, a slice of pear with cinnamon. She cut an extra piece of toast into little squares and placed it gently in a bowl on the porch for their visitor. Courage blinked at her. Even the odd ones need kindness, she said. Maybe especially them. The creature fluttered its spoon-shaped nose, delighted. Later, Muriel wandered out to the back of the property, that forgotten spot where the grass grows taller and the sky feels just a little closer. She stood beneath the old windmill, listened. Not for anything specific, just for the music that happens when you stop filling the silence. The wind turned the blade slowly. Creak, creak. She closed her eyes. Every sound has a story, she whispered. Even the old ones. That's wonder, finding beauty in what others forget to notice. As the day slipped on, Muriel returned to her rocking chair. The pebble was still glowing. Now it pulsed slower, like it had settled in. Courage climbed onto her lap. She held him without saying a word. Outside, the wind rustled the sunflowers. Inside, peace tucked itself into every corner. By afternoon, the skies had turned to watercolor. Hazy clouds wandered lazily past, casting soft shadows over the farmhouse. Muriel was in her garden, wearing her wide-brimmed hat, humming something quiet and familiar. She wasn't planting. She wasn't harvesting. She was simply watching. The sunflowers were following the light again. The bees were slow but steady. And somewhere near the fence, a butterfly, blue as the sky, fluttered in circles as if dancing just for her. Muriel smiled. "You've got rhythm," she whispered to the butterfly. "Better than some musicians I've known." She crouched down beside a daisy. Not to pick it. Not to tidy. Just to be with it. That's wonder. Spending time with something without trying to change it. Courage came trotting up behind her, his eyes wide. He held out a stick, but not just any stick. It was twisted, curled and pale, like a tiny driftwood sculpture. Muriel took it gently in her hands, turned it over. "What a curious little thing," she said. "Looks like it's been listening to the wind." She tucked it behind her ear like a pencil. Courage beamed. Later that day, clouds gathered in thick cotton layers. The kind that say, "A storm's coming," but not quite yet. Muriel stood on the porch looking up. She wasn't worried. She was curious. "Do you think the clouds ever miss being the ocean?" she asked Courage. He tilted his head. "Or do they love being travelers now?" She sipped her tea and watched the sky shift shades. That's wonder. Asking questions with no answers. Just to let your imagination breathe. The pebble on the windowsill now glowed a soft orange, like it was listening to the light outside, mirroring it. Muriel walked over to it, touched it gently. "You remind me of a campfire I once saw in the mountains," she said, "where the stars seemed to lean in closer just to warm their hands." Courage blinked. Muriel nodded. "Yes, stars have hands. We just don't see them yet. That's wonder. Believing in things because they make the world more beautiful." As the wind picked up and a few raindrops tapped on the roof, Muriel lit a candle near the windowsill. Not because she needed it, but because she liked the way it flickered. The creature from the garden, now a frequent visitor, curled near her feet. It made a small sound like a hiccup and a giggle mixed together. Muriel looked down. "I don't know your name," she said, "but you feel like a joy I forgot I needed." The creature nestled against her leg. The rain had passed. Just a light sprinkle enough to leave everything kissed with sparkle. Raindrops clung to the clothesline like tiny glass beads. The garden leaves bowed with gratitude, and the air smelled like earth remembering something good. Muriel stepped outside barefoot. She liked the cool of the wet porch under her feet. Courage followed, shaking a little. He didn't like thunder. But Muriel, she looked up at the clouds and smiled. "What a beautiful mess," she whispered. "Just look at how the sky cleaned itself. That's wonder. Finding beauty in what most people hurry past." She stooped down and picked a single dandelion, growing through a crack in the steps. She didn't blow on it. Didn't make a wish. She just held it up to the light. "You're brave," she told it. "Growing in the middle of where no one told you to." She tucked it behind Courage's ear. He looked puzzled but flattered. The creature from the garden waddled up, carrying something in its spoon-shaped nose. A tiny rock, irregular, speckled, kind of heart-shaped. It dropped it at Muriel's feet like a gift. "Oh my," she whispered. "What a treasure." She didn't say it wasn't a real gem. She didn't compare it to anything else. She picked it up and held it to her chest. "Thank you." The creature blinked, slow and happy. That's wonder. Receiving little things like they matter, because they do. Inside the house, a strange light flickered for just a second, just above the old armchair. Courage barked. But Muriel only tilted her head. "Not everything strange is scary," she said. "Sometimes it's just the universe waving hello." She walked over, touched the air with the back of her hand. Warm. Soft. Then it was gone. She didn't chase it. Didn't need to explain it. She just said softly, "How kind of it to stop by." That's wonder. Letting magic pass through your life without needing to keep it. As twilight gathered at the windows, Muriel brewed a small pot of mint tea. Not because she needed it, but because the scent reminded her of something from long ago. She didn't remember the memory exactly, just the feeling. "Isn't it lovely," she said, "how some things don't have to make sense to feel true?" She poured a cup for herself, one for Courage, and a thimble-sized one for the garden creature, who seemed thrilled. They sat quietly, just sipping. Nothing urgent, just present. The sun had finally dipped below the edge of nowhere. What was left behind wasn't dark, but deep. Soft blues, a trace of gold. The kind of dusk that feels like the world is whispering. Muriel stood on the back porch, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Courage sat by her feet. The little garden creature snoozed beside a flower pot, nose wiggling in its dreams. Muriel looked up. The first star had appeared. "There you are," she said quietly. "Right on time." That's wonder. Greeting the ordinary like an old friend. A cool breeze passed through the trees, rustling the leaves just enough to sound like laughter. Muriel closed her eyes. She didn't try to name the feeling that swept over her. She just let it settle into her chest. Like a lullaby she didn't remember learning. Back inside, she lit a candle. Not because it was dark, but because she loved how flames moved. She placed the candle beside the pebble, which had now turned a soft lavender glow. Courage tilted his head. The color seemed to change every day. Muriel nodded. "Everything is always becoming something new," she said. "Even us." She didn't sound sad. She sounded in awe. That's wonder. Accepting change as part of the miracle. The house creaked softly as she moved, floorboards remembering every footstep she'd ever taken. She picked up a book, ran her hand along the worn spine, and smiled. It wasn't the kind of book you read straight through. It was a book full of old fairy tales, old dreams. She opened to a random page, not looking for anything, just trusting what would find her. A story about a girl who planted stars in her garden. "That one again," she said, smiling. "Must be something I still need to learn." That's wonder. Returning to the same story and letting it tell you something new. Later, Muriel tucked Courage in, even though he was already warm. She smoothed the blanket, tucked it under his chin. "There," she whispered. "So the night knows you're cared for." She kissed his forehead gently. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't make promises. She simply gave love, like breath. Because that, too, is what wonder looks like. Giving without needing to be thanked. As she sat back down in her chair, the candle flickered. Once. The pebble glowed softly in reply. The garden creature peeked in through the screen door, then tucked itself into the shadow of a flower pot, sighing as it fell asleep. Muriel rested her hands in her lap, looked out at the starlit fields, and whispered only, "How lucky I am to be here for this." It was late now and nowhere. The kind of late where the stars blink slower, where the wind hushes its breath, where even time seems to pause. Inside the farmhouse, a quiet peace had settled over everything. Courage was asleep, curled up in a perfect circle, his paws twitching gently as he dreamed. The garden creature was snuggled in a slipper by the fireplace, his chest rising and falling like the soft ticking of a clock. And Muriel? She sat in her chair, a blanket over her lap, her eyes on the glowing pebbles still resting on the windowsill. It had turned to soft blue now, like a tiny echo of the night sky. She smiled at it. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. "You didn't have to, but you did. That's wonder. Being grateful even when you don't understand why something beautiful chose to stay." She looked around the room. The lamp hummed gently. The kettle clicked as it cooled. No music, no distractions. Just the feeling of being exactly where she needed to be. She closed her eyes, and for a long moment said nothing at all. Because sometimes wonder isn't loud. It doesn't sparkle or shine. Sometimes it's just this. A moment so peaceful you don't want it to end. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Soft enough not to wake the leaves. Just enough to remind them they were alive. Muriel opened her eyes slowly. She looked at Courage, then the creature, then out toward the stars. "What a day," she said almost to herself. "What a strange, wonderful little day." She reached down beside her and picked up the storybook again. The one with the girl who planted stars. She turned to the last page. There wasn't an ending, just a sentence, "And she never ran out of light." Muriel closed the book gently. "Of course she didn't," she said. "She knew where to look. That's wonder. Trusting that even when things seem quiet, something beautiful is still on its way." She walked to the front door, opened it slowly. The sky was full of stars now. So many, it felt like the universe had spilled its pockets. Muriel stood there in her slippers, under that great glowing sky. No fear, no rush, just awe. She placed a hand over her heart. "Good night, sky," she said. "Good night, world. Thank you for letting me see you." And then she turned off the porch light. Muriel's wisdom wasn't about knowing all the answers. It was about listening deeply, speaking kindly, and sensing what truly mattered. She didn't need big words or grand speeches, just a quiet, lived knowing that made everyone around her feel steadier. Yeah. It was a strange afternoon in nowhere. The sky was clear. The air was warm. But something in the wind felt unsettled. Courage paced back and forth by the back door. The chickens were restless. And even Eustace kept muttering under his breath, fumbling with his tools in the barn. Muriel, though, she was in the kitchen, stirring a pot, softly humming a tune she learned as a girl. She glanced up as Courage scurried in. "You feel it too, don't you, dear?" she said, not even turning. Courage blinked. How did she know? "The air's got too many questions today," she added. "That's when we need calm the most. That's wisdom. Not fixing the wind, but knowing how to stand still in it." Eustace came stomping in minutes later, scowling. "Stupid wrench won't fit. Tools are all wrong." He slammed a drawer. Courage jumped. Muriel didn't flinch. She just turned off the stove, wiped her hands, and placed a teacup in front of him. Try again after you've had something warm, she said gently. Sometimes the answer isn't in the tool. It's in the hands holding it. Eustace grumbled, but he took the cup. And for a while, he didn't slam anything. That's wisdom. Knowing when someone needs tea more than advice. Later that day, Courage came whimpering into the living room. He had tried to fix the broken fence, but only made it worse. He held up the splintered post with big, watery eyes. Muriel took it without a word, ran her hand along the break. It's okay to try and still get it wrong, she said. That's how we learn what patience feels like. She knelt down beside him. You did what you could. Let me help with the rest. That's wisdom. Offering help without making someone feel small. As twilight came, Courage and Muriel sat outside. The wind had settled. The sky blushed gently with orange and violet. Muriel held a piece of yarn in her hand, soft and tangled. She looked at it, then smiled. Life's like this, you know, she said. A bit messy, a bit knotted, but still soft and still useful. Courage leaned his head against her leg. The trick, she whispered, is not to rush the knots. Just be gentle and patient. She began slowly untangling the yarn. No hurry, no frustration, just care. Morning in nowhere always starts slow, but today it felt especially still. The windmill didn't turn. The chickens stayed quiet. Even the clock in the hallway ticked a little more gently. Muriel was in the garden, not working, just walking. Bare hands trailing over sun-warmed leaves, eyes soft, ears listening. She bent down beside a rose bush and whispered, You're late blooming this year, but you'll bloom when you're ready. She smiled like she meant it. That's wisdom, trusting things to happen in their own time. Courage followed her, carrying a watering can far too heavy for him. He tripped slightly and spilled some on his paws. Muriel chuckled softly. She knelt beside him, patting his head. You're trying to help. That's more important than doing it perfectly. She took the can gently, watered the base of a tomato plant, and handed it back lighter this time. Later, she found Eustace on the porch, muttering over a letter. Can't believe what my brother said. Always thinking he's smarter. He crumpled it, tossed it aside. Muriel picked up the letter without unfolding it. You don't have to read it today, she said softly. But you don't have to carry it in your chest either. He grunted. Didn't argue. Didn't walk away. Just sat, quietly, thinking. That's wisdom. Helping others make peace without pushing them toward it. Inside, Muriel returned to the kitchen. She stood in front of the pantry, eyes scanning the shelves. Then she smiled and pulled down 3 things: honey, oats, and cinnamon. She didn't need a recipe. She just knew. As she mixed and stirred, she spoke aloud to Courage. Sometimes, what people need most is something warm, something sweet, and someone who made it just for them. That's wisdom. Understanding needs that aren't spoken out loud. As the sun began its slow descent again, Muriel sat by the fireplace, knitting a small square of cloth. The colors didn't match. Some stitches were uneven. Courage looked up at her curiously. It won't win any ribbons, she said, but it'll warm someone's hands just the same. She held it up proudly, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Effort matters, dear. Love shows up in the doing. Evening had begun to settle in over nowhere. Not suddenly, but gently, like a shawl being laid over the shoulders of the world. Muriel lit a small lamp by the window.